Good evening, and thank you, and welcome to the Skirball Center. My name is Nancy Cole Silverman. I'm president of Sisters in Crime Los Angeles, and for those of you who know me, I spent 25 years in news and talk radio here in LA, and during my time in radio, we always started a new show at the top of the hour with an ID and a commercial break. So I'm not going to do it any differently tonight, but I promise you, 60 seconds, you can time me. Tonight's program is brought to you by Sisters in Crime Los Angeles and the Southern California Mystery Writers of America. Yay! Thank you. Sisters in Crime LA is part of a national organization founded by Sarah Paretsky in 1986. Nationally, we're 6,000 strong and predominantly female mystery writers, but hey, we got men too. And 6 months ago, I approached Les Klinger, president of MWA, and suggested, hey, we need to grow this group, get some new blood in here. So we thought the best way to do that was to put together a speaker series to show off some of our grand masters, and we are so excited tonight because we hope this will be the first of several big events. So we hope you'll take a moment to stop by one of our tables at the lobby, pick up a brochure, talk to some of our members. We're the guys in black baseball hats, which I forgot out in the lobby right now, but you can find us. And we'd love to talk to you about some of the things we're doing with our organization. So I think I've got it, 60 seconds. I can still do it. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn it over to Les Klinger. Thank you, Les.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. This really is an exciting event because it's grand. There you go. Bad pun. So in thinking about tonight's program, the first part of it was easy. Who should our, quote, panelists be? We are blessed to have a number of grandmasters in California, and since Michael Connelly, Walter Mosley, and Laurie R. King we're all friends, and they all said yes, that was easy. And then came the hard part. Who should be the leader, moderator of this conversation? So I thought about it, and I came up with a guy. Let's see. In 1974, he resurrected Sherlock Holmes. He wrote the best-selling novel, The 7% Solution, which brought Holmes back from the doldrums where he'd been. And then after that, he did a few other things. Director, legendary director, screenwriter, author, and my friend for 50 years, Nicholas Meyer. Nick, come on up.
Thank you for those kind, understated words. So we're going to get to the main event right away here. I just want to, by way of putting it in context, remind you of the dinner that John Kennedy threw at the White House for Nobel Prize winners. And when they were all seated, he said, it's a sobering thought to think that there's more talent seated in this room than at any time since Thomas Jefferson dined alone. So here we have three, count them, three grandmasters. We're not going to waste a lot of time giving you their bios and their credits, which you A, know, or B, can find online. This is going to be an evening about process. And you can't teach talent, but we might be able to learn something by listening to these people talk about craft. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Michael Connelly, Laurie King, and Walter Mosley. Please come up here and take chairs. So the way that I fantasize about this working is that it's going to be a non-sequential series of questions, and anybody can answer them, and we'll stay for as long as we're all having fun. Having said that, I would like to begin at the end and ask, how do you know when you're finished?
Well, you know, people have asked me that question a lot. Young writers, young male writers, young black male writers, being very serious about writing. And I always tell them, I said, well, you write the first draft, and then you read it, and you see what's wrong, and you fix it, and you read it, and you see what's wrong, and you fix it, and you read it, and you do that, 5 times, 10 times, 20 times. And at some point, you read it, and you see what's wrong, and you don't know how to fix it. Your book's done.
Yeah, it's always a problem when you're a commercial writer too, because you have this publishing house and you have an actual editor, and you think, a 220-page book, it's fine. It's just the right length, and they say, "Where's the rest of it?" So I'm at that phase at the moment.
So what do you do then?
I think of more stuff.
Oh, okay.
No, usually, because I know this was another of your questions, Nick, but so I'll jump onto that.
Go ahead.
I'm not an outliner, so when I write a first draft, it is a sort of outline, and it tells me the book that I want to tell. And it usually is the machinery of the plot. So I make sure that I have my key people, and they're here, and I'm goal that I'm working towards, and I sort of turn the little machine, and all the little gears go, which is, that the logo. Any of you see the social media for this with the little gears on it? That's me. I'm turning the thing, and then all the little crank is coming out, and then it gets to the end, and it works. But it's not, it's not a perfectly satisfying machine. It's just the bits. And then I have to make a novel out of it. So that's the sort of basic machinery, the bones of the story, and then I build the story out of that. But it's, as you say, when you get to a certain point that you can't decide what else it needs, that's the point where you either have to give it to your editor and get feedback. And if she says, yes, it's great, then you say, phew. And if she says it's incomplete, then you need to find something that makes it emotionally complete as a story, and that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think you're right. Rewriting is king. I don't know about 20 rewrites. I mean, come on. But I think we all follow the same path. The first one is to get the story down, and then you can come in and rewrite and add flourishes and add emotion and character things. And that actually the second draft and the third are the most fulfilling, because that's where you're putting that stuff in. I mean, the plot, the mechanics of the story, as you say, extremely important. But I think writers gravitate more towards the character stuff, and that usually comes once you have the machinery in place.
I don't know about you, but I also find that when I look at my first draft, because it's the first time that I've really seen the story, I realize what it doesn't have, and what the story is supposed to be about, and it isn't yet. So I often, when I look at a first draft, suddenly realize what the book is that I'm writing, which seems kind of backwards, but writer's brains. What can I say?
It sounds perfect to me. You're discovering it. I always have to tell people, I was just talking to an agent here. I want to say in LA, but I'm in LA, so. But, and I have a book called The Tempest Tales, and it's about, a sinner who's been sentenced to hell but refused to go because of free will. You don't have to go. And this angel has been sent down to convince him to go to hell, and he ain't doing it. And I gave it to the agent, and the agent looked at it and said, Walter, it's really good, and I really like it, and I love the writing, and I think it'd be an interesting series, but couldn't we get rid of the heaven and hell? Because there's that. There's like it's a novel. A novel is the word novel. It means unique, right? And so it's going to be different.
Do you show your books before you show it to an editor? Are there friends or readers whom you trust to give you useful feedback? Do you do out-of-town tryouts?
Does that mean yes? No.
Yeah, I have readers. I have a few that I have some real life detectives who will read stuff and always improve books. In more recent years, I've been writing about a female detective named Ballard, and she's a one-to-one inspiration. There's a singular detective who's responsible for that character, who inspired that character, and she reads my stuff. Sometimes I'm sending her chapter by chapter, because she helps me rewrite the books and gives me the language right and everything. So she's a someone who is an example of. I usually have 2 or 3 people read it before my editor ever sees it, even though I have a very trusting relationship with my editor.
Your characters always do what you want them to?
Well, yeah. I mean, maybe not at first, but after a while, because it's it's funny, to say your characters. It's an interesting term because I'm writing the book. It's like so. It's a creation in that way, and it may end up in places that surprise me, but it still came out of me. You know what I mean?
Sort of.
Yeah, they have to do what you want because you're writing it, but I think you can say you have this idea for a book or the inspiration for it, and this is what I'm going to do in this book, and you have 0 pages, and by the time you have 300 or 400, it may have gone in a different direction, but it's still, you're still the marionette that kind of controls everything.
But that's still the direction you want to go. It doesn't go in a different direction and you're going mad because you want it to be different.
Right.
And it won't do it.
I think to a certain extent you depend on your characters to come to life enough to do the unexpected. To a certain extent, you don't want them to just completely go off the way. If you're working heaven and hell, you don't want them to change sides without asking you first. But but to have a character that comes up with something unexpected that makes you think about it, I think is a more interesting way of building a character because it's an organic way of really letting the character come to life rather than just having it. But then, being a non-outliner, I would say that.
So which comes first, the characters or the plot?
I can't see how a plot could ever come first. That'd be like, I don't even understand that because the plot is there are 2 things, right? There's the story, and that's what you're telling. And then there's the plot, which is the structure of revelation. And what you reveal and when you reveal it is how the plot works. But if you don't know the story, you can't do that, as far as I'm concerned.
Sometimes you start a story with a certain element of the plot. I want to tell a story about X or Y. But it doesn't come to life until you give it characters to do that thing.
But you don't say X
We're
walks
all
into
looking
the
at
room.
you, pal.
I think it's happened both ways. I do acknowledge that sometimes I've been told a story and I say that can go the distance as a novel, and that's a story, and then I have to figure out which character is going to carry that story, or do I create a new character? But oftentimes it really starts with the character and what I'm going to do with this one this time. What I want to explore in their life, and then I got to build a story around that.
Yeah, I think that we all build novels around. Just there's something that we want to build that novel around, and it can be. I've built a novel around the title. I had one book that I wrote that was my 9/11 book. It was a look at what is the cause of terrorism, and there's other stories that I want to write about a place or a certain event, and so you tend to have this one little nubbin, the little seed that you build around, but it needs all the things that both the idea and the ground that you put it in, the setting and the time, and the characters that come to life in it.
You guys are all billed as grand masters, mystery writers of America. Did you always write mysteries? Did you write anything before you wrote mysteries? And how did you come to be writers?
My first book was a sort of futuristic thing. I got halfway through it, and I was the mother of small children, which means that you have no time to yourself. But I got halfway through this book and realized I had no idea what to do with the story, and so it went on the shelf for about 10 years. So by the time that I started writing a book that I actually carried through and finished, I had the ability to think another few years about how you would tell a story. And I was in my mid-30s. I had been reading since I was 5 and learned the language of storytelling in a way that made me feel what I wanted to do with a novel. And became an overnight success only 15 years later.
A lot of people have that experience. I didn't start writing until I was 34, 35. And then I just started writing. I just write ever since then. Every day since that. And then the day I started, I've written, and that's been great. The first book I wrote, one of my favorite teachers was Edna O'Brien. She taught at City College, and she was really wonderful. She was like, I just loved her. She was great. And one day I'd written these stories, and she said, "Walter, write a novel." Like, really, she didn't even look at me. It just went. And I ran away and wrote a novel, And it was called Gone Fishing. It was two young black men coming of age in the Deep South in the late 30s. And everybody had the same response to it. Well, it's really good writing. We really like it a lot, Can't publish it because it's the main characters are 2 black men. There's only one white person. It's a crazy white lady. And then there's the black women are there, but they're not, central characters. And they said, and it's a fact, white people don't read about black people. Black women don't like black men, and black men don't read. So we can't publish your book. So then I said, okay, and I wrote about them again. The same 2 characters, it's still Easy and Mouse. I wrote about them again. And I think 3/4 of the way through the book before I realized, hey, this is kind of like a mystery. Because I didn't think of it in that way. And, and so then I had to come back again and rethink, through that. It's lots of fun. There's a lot of freedom in writing if you don't worry about making money.
Yeah, I've always been stuck on the crime thing, so that's all I've written. And I was a newspaper reporter for a long time before I was writing books, but I was on crime beats and court beats and things like that, so it's always been kind of circulating in my life and prepping me for writing the novels.
Let's talk a little bit about editors. And can you, are there good ones? Have you had to search for them? What role do they play in your work?
I'm sorry? What the question is, what job do they have at the publisher? Because, I think an ideal editor is only cares about that book, the book that you intended to write, if it works. That's an ideal editor. That say, you say this, but you seem to want to do something else. And if they're right, it's an amazing thing, amazing feeling to work through. But right now, it's like, what can I sell? Who can I sell it to? How can I work it? How do I work with this, overworked marketing department, this overworked publicity department? I had an editor once say to me, I had a guy, a policeman, but he got blamed for a crime he didn't commit. He's in Rikers Island. And his friend, the dispatch sergeant, comes in and he says to him, he says, you know, they got you on rape, man. They got you on rape. He said, no, but it was consensual. The camera. He said, yeah, man, your dick is so big and so black that just couldn't be true. And my editor wrote in the margins, never use, this is a quote, never use the word dick. I'm like, are you a censor or an editor? You know, but you know, you can see where somebody might end up in that position. You know, so, you know, my good friend, Paul Coates, who happens to be Ta-Nehisi Coates' father and also my publisher at Black Classic Press, he reads my books, and I know he only worries about if the book works or not. You know, and that's a very rare experience to have in the business of publishing.
Yeah, the publishing world has really gotten odd since the three of us began. Hatched. Because we're all more or less contemporaries. And I think I would hate to go into the publishing world now, both as a writer and as an editor, because everything is about the bottom line. And when I started, I was with St. Martin's Press, which was one of the houses that would buy something unagented. They would actually, you know, they would get together once a week. The young editors would get together with pizza and beer and go through all the slush things that have been sent in. And if you happen to get your manuscript was at the top of the pile before the beer kicked in, you probably had a good chance. But now it's all, you know, it's all about marketing, and it's all about you have to be like something, but just that much different. And it's sad. You're seeing a lot of good stuff coming out in the smaller houses, I think. But so if you're not interested in making a living, it's good.
Yeah.
Whenever I get a new editor, I start the relationship by saying the only notes I want from you are thank you notes. and the relationship goes down from there. But no, the reality is I've only had two, and I've been publishing now, I think, 32 years, and I've only had two editors, and I had really good relationships with them. And, you know, I think, whatever, 38 out of 38 times my books have come out of the editing process much better. So I really trust that system. But you guys are right. Everything has changed. I always feel it's almost like high school. We're in the same graduating class. We came around the same time. And it is a different business now. I mean, we were published before there was an internet, you know, and then Amazon and things like that. And these changes in technology and society have certainly changed publishing, where it just has to keep moving and worry about these market conditions and things like that. I mean, I usually have a cover of my book before anyone at the publishing house has even seen a page of my book, you know, but they're saying, do you like this cover? Will this work? That kind of thing. So it's all about the machinery of marketing and what works and how can we make something work.
Yeah, I think when I was first a new author, I remember asking my editor what they wanted me to do to help to sell the book. And they said, that's not your job. You write the books and we sell it.
Yeah, right.
Which is not the way it works now.
Yeah, part of it is just capitalism. I mean, it used to be that the names of publishers were the names of people who owned the business. They publish books. They love books. They put the books out. They invest in an author. They say, well, 5-6 books, maybe you might catch on. But now it's owned by people, who they have so much money. You say, well, how much did we make on that book? Well, we made about an $80,000 profit. They say, my car costs more than $80,000. I need more. There's that feeling that you get. Not exactly, but I think it's true that the system of profit for publishing, which is kind of like being a blacksmith, is it's hard. It works for some people, and a lot of people. I mean, most authors, kind of historically, haven't made a living off of it. That's just true. I remember when I was at Penn, before we had our falling out, that they had a thing. 80% of the writers didn't make the greater part of their money from writing. But they all were above the median in income because, being writers, they were, they had a much broader experience than most, people.
I will say, though, that in my experience, most editors, even in the big houses, really do love books, and they would love to do nothing but improve books and work on books and do a one-to-one relationship with people. I mean, most of them find the way the publishing world is run very frustrating. And so they sort of spend their time trying to thread their way between the realities of this huge machine and the joy of a new story.
It's true, but that
Some of you are prone to write in first person or third person, others. Do you ever switch around, or do you have preferences, and what are they about? Why do you prefer one voice over another?
I've used both. My main series is structured as memoir, so it's now 18 volumes of her memoir. But I've started putting in chapters that are third person because it becomes very awkward if you're writing first person and the other person has found out something. You have to either have them write a letter or have a conversation. It's sometimes stilted, so it's easier to just put in the occasional chapter. It's interesting that, and I have written other books that are all third person. My cop books tend to be third person. The thrillers that I've done are third person. The Russell and Holmes series that I do is mostly first person. But it's interesting that first person, you would tend to think of first person as being much more intimate, that the reader would really know the world of this person. And yet, as a writer, it's a really valuable exercise because it's deceptive. What you're seeing is this one person's point of view. And as a mystery writer, you can really take advantage of that because, sometimes you want your person to see something very clearly, but actually it's just outside their point of view where the truth lies. So it's an interesting game to play with the first person's apparent intimacy, but in fact, it's very limited.
I switch around. I do almost by character. With third person, you can hide stuff from the reader, and you create this thing of like, what is Harry up to? What's his next move? And that can create momentum in the story and carry you forward. When I was writing books about the Lincoln lawyer, I viewed those as like a whispered confession, like he's gonna, get in my car and I'm gonna take you on a tour of this so-called justice system and how it works or doesn't work. And so I really wanted him kind of like in the shadows whispering to the reader. So I just thought that had to be first person. And so I mean, I think it's really a choice you make when you're figuring out what kind of character you want to write about and how much you want to communicate of the point of view to the reader. You can't really cheat the reader in first person, I guess is what I'm saying, because if you leave something out they should know, it's kind of like, well, why didn't he tell me about that? That kind of thing.
Well, because they didn't know it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the easy way of that. Well, they didn't know that was true, But I mean, really, this is so much fun to listen to the word switching. I just love it because, I think of Marvin Hagler, say, well, I'll fight you my left hand, I'll fight you my right hand. Terrence Crawford does the same thing. I also think of Moby Dick. Moby Dick starts out, call me Ishmael. It ends up in the mind of Ahab. Like, if you read that book, I mean, you think, God, the looseness of narration, but the power of the prose is amazing. you know? I do it too, you know. Listen, I write first person if my first person is interesting. You know, sometimes the first person is not interesting. Or like, for instance, when I write about Socrates Fortlow, he's very silent, he's very brutish and brooding, and so I can't write from his point of view because he's not going to say anything. You know, fuck you, man. Get out here. You know, so I have to look at it from different points of view. You know, and I just wrote a book that I think it must have been universal point of view because God knew everything. You know, but I think that but it's fun to play with it, right? It's fun to play with it because you can even experiment with it. You know, that, oh, well, this time I did it first person, this time I'm going to do it, you know, third person. You know, it may not work, you may not do it, you may not put it out, but, you know, it's fun.
Present company accepted. Who are the writers that you admire and why?
Or maybe present company not accepted. Who do I hate? And no, I won't do that. No. I read that, you know, Chester Himes over here, who I think is a better writer than Ralph Ellison, definitely. Gabriel Garcia Marquez over here, and kind of like, you know, like the dark horse, Roger Zelazny, Roger Zelazny, the fantasy science fiction writer who writes better sentences than almost anybody I've ever read. I mean, he works those sentences, you know. I like those three.
I think that when it comes to influence, probably I learned more from science fiction writers because it opens so many doors that I love the structure of mystery as a writer, but I love the way that fantasy and sci-fi just open possibilities. And I particularly love various writers who are doing a combination of things, where like Ben Aronovich is a British writer who writes police procedurals with magic. And they're just, the way that, you know, he's just a cop dealing with things, except the things he's dealing with are not really real. And I love it because it's entertaining and it's human and it allows you as a reader and as a writer to explore a lot of very deep issues that you might not have if you were writing just a straight cop story. So I love those blended ones.
And you can use that, like Chandler does that. He'll like, whenever he gets drugged, you know, like it's like it's an amazing. It's like a science fiction, or a fantasy story. Like, you know, all these people are running around through the folds of this, you know, and it's like you can do a lot. You can do a lot of that kind of work straight in the genre.
Oddly, I would also throw in science fiction. I think Kurt Vonnegut really inspired me to want to be a writer. Just something about his stories and the humor in them and how they fit together. I'll just throw that one out there.
Do you reread your own books? Start to finish. Have you read? Do you reread one?
I have. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to. If you bring back a character, you bring back a situation or something like that, or even just the last book you wrote, you know, sometimes you have to. But you know, I do sometimes. I don't particularly like it.
Yeah, for pleasure, no. No. For one thing, all I see are the mistakes. I'll get to the first page and there'll be a word that's repeated 3 times in the first paragraph, and I'll think, "Oh God, how did that get past me?" But no.
It's not a fun process, and I have like writing amnesia. I really forget books when I move on to the next one, and. You know, I've been in writing rooms for TV shows, and I think the people in there don't really believe I wrote the books because they ask questions. You know, they ask questions about what does this mean or when, I can't even remember writing it. So a few times I've had to reread books because they're adapting them, and I'm expected to answer some questions.
So question, when you have to reread them, are you sometimes pleased with what you've done, or is it just negative?
No, I mean it's a mix. I mean every now and then you think, well, that was pretty good, but you mostly
This
see
isn't
what
bad.
you see what you could have done better.
Yeah.
Definitely see what
Yeah.
you could have done better.
I had that. Like I was working with this show called the Last Days of Ptolemy Gray. It was 6 episodes, limited series, and I had a writer I was working with, Jerome Hairston. And I said, listen, Jerome, I don't even know what to do with this part here. He said, okay, let me take a look at it. So he took it away, and he wrote this wonderful scene about this driver driving the main character and figuring things out about life. And I said, man, that is great. I love that. He said, well, you should. You wrote it. That was so funny. It's like, I don't know. Yeah, it is true that it is true about writing. A lot of people think that writers are kind of in a different place, but the truth is every person who reads your book has read a different book and has created that book in their mind. Some of those people are smarter than you, some of them are more creative than you, some of them just had a whole other experience. And that's really true. It's not just us. The book has its own life really soon after it's published,
I want to ask a couple of questions now about the actual process. Do you write? What times of day do you write? I want to know, do you write longhand? Some of the details about the physical act of writing. People say sometimes, how long did it take you to write this book? Which I always think is a somewhat naive question, because there's the thinking about the book, and then there's the physical activity of putting the words down. Well, I'd like to know more from each of you about how you go about it and when. Are you good procrastinators? What do you do to procrastinate?
Research is really great. Yeah. When I first started, I used to write longhand on a pad. This was the days before laptops, and this was the days when to write on a computer, you put in a floppy disk with the program, and then you pulled it out, and then you put in another disk, and then it was just better. It was just better to just write. And I found that I could write really long periods of time, because I would have a day where my husband was taking the kids off to the beach or something, and I would have 8 hours, and I would have uninterrupted time to write. If I had had to write 8 hours on a computer or something, I probably couldn't have done it. But on longhand with a fountain pen is so little physical work.
And only 2 fingers.
Yeah, and it's just a good pen. I could write, 5,000 words easy. But when I shifted over onto actual laptops, when you could put a laptop on your, remember the first laptops, you couldn't actually put them on your lap. You'd get burns. But when they actually became, laptop, I found that if I got in the same position as I was when I was writing, I have a kind of oversized artist clipboard that I still use. And if I was in the same position, I could write on a laptop, whereas before I would have to write it longhand and then type it. So, the brain, you have to trick the brain somehow.
I'm a laptop guy, and I try to just get up before it's light out, and I really like having the quiet of the morning, and that gets me going, gets momentum going, and then I go till I'm tired. But,
Could you be less specific?
I don't write at a desk. I sit on a couch, have one of those kind of things you're talking about. And like a 6 to 12 day is really good for me.
I write every morning for 3 hours. I certainly, I've been a computer programmer since I was in my early 20s, and so writing on a computer has been really the only thing I kind of knew. And so I've done that forever. There's always one time when I stop and I read the whole novel out loud into some kind of recording device, so I can hear it, because after a while you stop seeing what you wrote, and you need to to get away from it, and I find that reading it out loud does that. I write by hand sometimes, but then I have to copy it into the computer, which drives me crazy. Like it's like, but I would say that the best way of writing I've ever heard of was Edna O'Brien. Edna wrote everything by hand, double spaced on pages, and she would give it to her typist, and the typist would type it up. And then she would make changes to the type pages and give it back to the typist. And then she would just go back and forth like that until it was finished. I love that.
Do you have any advice for aspiring writers?
Read everything. I think that, I learned to write as a reader. I don't think I ever took a class in writing other than basic English grammar classes. And I think you can learn to produce language by hearing it and by seeing it and by living it.
To be contradictory, but not in a negative way, reading and writing don't seem to have anything to do with me. I do read, obviously I read, and I like reading, but it doesn't have anything to do with my writing, And I'll add, going to school, I just was good for me because I could be around other writers, because and it's America. You tell people you write, and they yawn and turn away, And so you need to have a community. The stories are all around you, all the time, everywhere. People are always living it, doing it, fearing it. And that's where the stories come from, and that's where, where I decide to put them down.
Michael, any advice for aspiring?
Not really. I mean, you do it. You said you've written every day since you decided to be a writer at 34. I mean, I think that's it. I mean, no matter what you do in life, you get better at it the more you do it. So write every day. Yeah. And, even if I had a teacher in creative writing in college, and he said that you write every day, even if it's only for 15 minutes, because the act of the writing for 15 minutes takes lots of time of the story circulating in your head before you get to the point where you're putting words on page.
Yeah.
Well, this gets to my the next question, or the question I started and didn't finish, was how long, because some of you are extremely prolific, you're fast, and believe me, I know you're fast, because I'm slow. So how long does it take you to write a book? And again, we're talking about the thinking process and the physical act. And is there a stark difference? In other words, are you somebody like Mozart who thinks it up and then just copies it down? Or is it a back and forth process between the thinking and the writing? And how much time does that consume? Say you're sitting down to write one of your novels. How long is that going to take from the time you get the idea for it?
I mean, it's all over the place for me. I mean, I've written a book in as quickly as 3 months, and then I've written a book it took on and off 3 years. I think I'm always having, I'm always throwing out a net, trying to get inspiration, ideas. And I carry stuff for a long time, and somehow it becomes, this is the time to write that book. I'll give you an example. In 2001, at a Dodger game, I met a guy who was a criminal defense lawyer, and he worked out of his car. So that was a cool idea. And I published a book, Lincoln Lawyer, in 2006. Now, it didn't take me 5 years at a laptop to write that, but I kept meeting with that guy, I kept going to courtrooms, I was just kind of gathering string for a long time and thinking about it. And then at some point I thought, okay, this is the time to write that book. And that process of actually at my laptop probably took 11 months, 12 months, something like that.
Laurie?
So how many, I mean, you've been doing 2 books a year for a while.
No, I mean, I've done that. I've done that, I think, 4 or 5 times, but it's not a regular thing.
Yeah. So do you tend to write a more or less complete version when you finish your draft? I mean,
my first draft?
a 3-month book is How rough?
That was about a newspaper reporter, and I had been a newspaper reporter, so I didn't have to sit back and go, "What would this guy do here?" What would it just came out of me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably a bad example.
Thank you.
Let me give you a bad example.
I tend to do a book a year. The first draft takes maybe, depending on the book, if it's a Russell, which is, I know them well, so they're 3 months for the first draft. If it's a more thriller one, if it's a standalone, it's more closer to 5 months. And then the rewrite probably takes, again, between 3 and 5 months. And then you have the various stages that you go through with the editing, so that when you've got the first draft, then you have the feedback from your editor and you incorporate it, and then you invariably have various stages and you hate it by the end of it. But yeah, I tend to do a book a year. I tend to write, depending on whether I'm working against a deadline or not, 1,000 to 2,000 words a day. Sometimes I deliberately keep myself back because I'm trying to write a more deliberate book, so that I will say I don't want to do more than 1,200 words a day. Other times, especially as I'm getting closer to the end, I can go and go and go, and I don't tend to work as long hours now as I used to. I used to work. I could easily do a 10-hour day, no problem. Now my brain is fried by the end of it. So
My brain started off fried. I can't write more than 3 hours to save my life. I can, but I throw everything away that I write after 3 hours. So it's no use for it. So interesting. I've written a lot of books, like 63 of them, and it's like, and I'm always writing, and books keep happening.
I'm sorry, did you say 63 novels?
I published 63, yeah. And when I'm writing about sex, I could do it in 6 weeks. There's one book I wrote, John Woman. It took me 20 years, literally 20 years to write the book. I kept coming back to it, and it kept saying, now you're not ready yet. But yeah, I just, when the writer's strike happened in Hollywood, I was so happy I could write. And really, I wrote 3 books. In 18 months, in 3 books. I just sat there, and the books were like waiting to come out. It was funny. Sometimes it takes longer. Certainly if I'm writing anything else, like if I'm writing screenplays and stuff like that, it's harder. It's not more difficult writing itself, but trying to when you're working in a collaborative way as a writer, I find it much harder. The thing is, I love writing. I really love it, I'm sure you guys do too. It is the most wonderful thing. If I feel bad, if I'm like depressed, I say, well, I'll write and I'll feel better. It's just, it's a fantastic
John le Carre
exercise.
he said, all I know is I'm happy when I'm writing, and I'm not happy when I'm not writing. So that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So we've now been sitting here for an hour, and I've asked every question that I always wanted to ask you guys. But I think maybe now it would be a good time to turn it off to the rest of you and take some questions from the audience. Would that be okay to do that? Is that a good thing? Okay, so we have lights. There's a gentleman right there.
Hi, Nick. It's Michael Gard.
You have to speak loud.
Hi, Nick. It's Michael Gard. I have a question for those of you who have both written and screenplays.
Do you, having written both prose and screenplays, do you feel that screenplays are a literary form?
They can be, yeah. Just as a book can move you, a film can, or a episode of a TV show, and it is very collaborative, especially in television. But I've seen some stuff come out of the writing rooms that I've been in that I think are quite literary. And yeah, he had the experience where he said, that was pretty good. He goes, well, you wrote it. Well, I mean, I get credit for stuff I did not write on shows. And I remember one time the show The Wire, I can't remember the name of the character, but this cop died and they put his body on a pool table and somebody gave a toast or, about what it means to be a cop. And I thought it was the best thing ever written about what it means to be a cop. And the screenplay was credited to Dennis Lehane. And when I saw him once, I said, man, that was the best thing ever written about being a cop. He said, thanks, but I didn't write it. Somebody else on the show wrote it. So, but yeah, I mean, what I'm just cited, that was very, that was a literary form, that episode, that script.
It was John Huston who wrote and directed the Maltese Falcon, right?
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
And he wrote it he went to his secretary. It was a secretary then. He said, type up all the dialogue and tell me who said it. And if you read the book and watch the film, it is that. It's like reading the book. So obviously it can be literary, I mean, it's like it's a wonderful book, and it's a wonderful film, and it's like listen, you look at Ingmar Bergman. I mean, there's some work done. I mean, or Apocalypse Now, even like there are things that film can do that you'd be hard-pressed to do as writing a novel. But it all comes down to the language. It all comes down to who wrote it and who imagined it. And then it turns into something mechanical. But that doesn't mean it's not art.
I'm sorry, you have to raise your hands high, and then I'll repeat the question. Yes, right there with that.
When you drafting
Question is, do you work on the one novel that you're working on, or do you work on several?
Or are you polyamorous,
I do know that Turner, when he was painting, and if he had a tube of yellow in his hands, he'd be working on several paintings at the same time, and he'd go around with that yellow.
That's great.
And find uses for that. Anyway, do you work on one things, or do you work on more things?
I do. I work on one book at a time.
You work on?
One book at a time.
One book.
Though, if you're writing a lot, then you finish a book and you turn it in, and that's Tuesday. So Wednesday, you have to write every day, so you start another book. But then by 3 Wednesdays from now, they give you the book back and say, we need it in 2 weeks. And so you go back to that book. You know what I mean? So there is a juggling, but I try my best to stay on one book.
Yeah, I tend to do one project at a time by preference. The last book that I did was really difficult because I had already set my brain for doing a different book. And for various reasons, we decided to do another Russell instead of the one. And it took me about 2 months to get I hadn't even started writing it, but I was there with that book, and I had to sort of be there instead with the other book. And it was about 2 months before I could really get out of the one and into the other. So it means that instead of having a book out in February next year, I have a book out in June next year, because my brain said, you what? But we're going to do this, Mom. We're going to play with these people. You wanted to do that.
I don't know. I think with a book, it's really hard to like write 2 at a time or something like that. I'm also one book at a time, and that has all my attention.
Do you ever find yourself writing a book and a script? And
I can do that. Like a lot of my days I write books 6 to like noon, 6 to lunch, and then I might work on a script in the afternoon.
What else we got here? Right here in the front. Yes, with the hat.
Yeah, for you guys that do recurring
Do your continuing characters change as characters? Is that a representation we use?
Yeah, at least incrementally. I don't think characters can remain static book to book, or I think you'll lose your own attention to it, and then you'll lose the audience. So I think there has to be changes, and which is not that hard to do. I mean, people evolve. You try to make them as realistic as possible, and if you're doing that, then people are changing.
It's a funny thing. I think in more comic novels or more humorous novels, even something like Brecht Stout, the characters don't need to change. It's like Jack Benny, Mr. Benny, they want the rent. You're going to start laughing, because Mr. Benny and the rent.
I have a question. If you're writing characters who appear in a series of books, and do you always find yourself advancing the chronology of those characters, or do you ever go back in time to an earlier part of those characters' lives? And if so, how do the incremental changes, do you manage to keep straight, or you have to refamiliarize yourself? Well, wait, he hadn't become an astrologist by that point, and things like that.
This is always an interesting thing to look how different writers handle the period of time that passes. Some people let the character remain just the same and everything changes around them, but they're still 35 years old, whether it's 1990 or 2020. Others, are really specific as to watching them grow, and then they're faced with the fact that their characters have to retire because that's what the calendar says. I get around it by having everything crammed into so tight a period, so that because I have one of my characters starts out in his late 50s, because I write a Sherlock Holmes story. And so I can't let too many decades go past. So my characters fit in there's 8 books in a year. So they're really busy. But it is interesting just to try and see how different characters, how different people handle that. But I have found that there's 2 or 3 people who really, to go back to the other question that he was asking, how much you change your characters. I personally really like having a series where I can be guaranteed that the person is different at the end, the last page, than they were at the beginning. I like seeing how that case has changed them. I like seeing how their relationship with other people has changed them. And to get a feeling that as 10 books go by, that person has grown. But then there's people like Lee Child. I mean, Jack Reacher, those books are completely interchangeable. Yeah. It doesn't matter. I mean, I love his books, but they're not. There's Jack Reacher does not develop as a character.
Well, his muscles get bigger, but
spoiler alert.
But I have a
and
question
Kinsey
about
Millhone. Kinsey Millhone is another. I mean, Kinsey Millhone, it doesn't really change.
But when you say change at the end of a book, and then when the next book and the next book, do you see the changes as linear? Because I know in most people's lives, I see the changes as kind of cyclical. It's not like you're going, for me, it's going straight ahead and up this hill. You went up here and then you fell down there and then you tried to get up again, but then it didn't work. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like, because, I definitely skip by year. I started in 1939, then to 48. Now the book I'm doing right now is 72. But Easy, some things he's changing in because he's getting older, some things he's learning, and some things he's forgetting. You know what I mean?
And some things he's reliving, because you see the same patterns of behavior, often things that get him into trouble. Mm-hmm. Again, spoiler alert. But I mean, the difference between Easy Rawlins in amethystine. Mm-hmm. Where's the emphasis on that word?
Well, the one I use is a ways to say it, but amethystine.
Amethystine, thank you. The Easy who is walking in amethystine is the same easy that was in Devil in a Blue Dress, but red dress. Blue dress.
Yeah, blue dress.
Sorry,
You can stay.
blanking at the moment.
That's okay.
He's facing the same kinds of challenges in himself, but he's a different person. He's grown.
But that's what.
And-
so some
and
things
that's
are
what I
ahead
love.
and some things are
Yeah.
repeating. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else we got? Yes, right there. Does everybody hear that? How do you manage the cat and mouse with the reader telling them too much, too little? Is that more or less what you're...
In your second draft, you cut all that stuff out. So,
Say that again?
in the second draft, you cut that stuff out. Actually, my drafts get shorter as I go through, and I am thinking about that stuff, and operating under the less is more. So, I think my first drafts, everyone could guess everything and every move, and so I trim it out. So, my first drafts are usually like 450 or 480 pages, and I usually turn them in around 395. So I cut a lot out.
Yeah, I'm just the reverse. My first drafts tend to be around 250 pages, and my finals 400. So, I find that when it comes to just the mechanics of building the mystery, I really appreciate having eyes on it at a certain point. I give it to my editor when it's at a certain point. We talk about, at what point should we learn this, and is this given enough here? And but I don't show it to my sort of beta team until it's like the second or third draft is, so that it's a book. And I then ask them specific questions. When did you know this? When did you guess this? Does this make sense that this character did that? And having eyes on the outside, because, the writer's been living with it for months and months and months, and I don't know what's there and what isn't by that point. So having outside eyes.
Yes, right there.
John Murray once said that George Smiley changed dramatically after the part got
Do your characters change when you see them acted or hear them in audio books?
Like for me, oddly enough, audio really, I think I'm inspired by hearing stories, so audio is a big part of my process. And so I hear Titus Welliver's voice when I'm writing Bosch. I was writing Bosch for about almost 25 years before he played the part, so I still kind of see the guy that I created many years ago. But I can't get, not that I'm trying to, but I can't get around his voice. I hear his voice a lot, and which is a really good thing to have when you're writing, because he reads his books out loud. Hearing stuff is really important in the writing process for me.
I have a question. How do you guys feel, about the audio versions of your books, and who reads them? Do you want to pick who that voice is? Do you have any approvals, any consultations, or any violent or vehement objections?
When they wanted Tiny Tim to read Easy, I was so upset.
I didn't hear
I said,
what
I really love letting people do their jobs. Like, my job is writing the books. They're like, the audio thing has this big, they have a big thing. They always offer me to listen, and sometimes I listen to, the
But have you ever heard a voice and say, this is wrong?
No, I haven't, actually. I haven't said no to anybody.
Okay.
But, I could, I might, but, people, everybody, and it's always better when you let people do their jobs. Me telling people how to, I don't like the print you put on this,
You're too trusting, though.
I am?
Yeah, I mean, you don't check to see. Also audiobooks are like part of the biggest growth part of publishing right now, so it's really important. And I'm in a good spot now, and it's also about what kind of leverage you have. But like, I remember one of my early books was read by Burt Reynolds, and I used to not listen because I didn't want to hear anyone's voice in my head when I'm writing about Harry Bosch. But people started saying, "Hey, if you want to laugh, go listen to Angel's Flight." And it was, so I finally listened to it, and it was like horrible. And the way he would change his voice for women and stuff, everyone was like a Southern belle, you know. So. And it's gone through fads. You know, in the 90s, it was they would get celebrity readers. You know, they did one time they were trying to get authors to do their own reading, and I came in. They had me come in, and after an hour, they said, "Let's take a break," and then they came back. They came back and said, "We're going to go in a different direction." So I more or less got fired off my own book.
I know, that's great.
Yeah.
You know, it's true, but now they're much more serious about it. And listen, I've heard my books because sometimes when I have to read them again, it's better just to listen.
Right.
And I've never been disappointed about it. So, like, you know, if I had that experience, that would be fun to do that with Burt Reynolds. That would be great. I'd let Burt Reynolds be Easy Rollins. You know, that would be so much fun. You know.
We have a question here in the very back. Yes, the young lady. Is there a choice of locales? Is Los Angeles a deliberate choice? Is that? Or say it a little louder, because I didn't. How is it different to set a book in LA from a book set elsewhere in New York, say, or another place?
You know, the only thing I can say, I think any place you write, it is going to be a character. The place has to be because of gravity or something. But I once was doing a reading in a place, and a guy came up to me afterward, and he said, "Hey man, you know that house, that blue house that Mouse was in on Slauson?" And I went, "Yeah." And he said, "I was born in that house." Now, I made up that house. But with the writing, if the writing works, the people inhabit, you know, literally inhabit the what you're doing, and you have to do that no matter where you are or what you're writing about. You have to know the place, you know, or at least pretend that you know the place enough that the reader thinks it's real.
When you're writing and you're living in New York, which you've done, or you're living here, do the books that you write take place in the places where you're writing them, or do you flip it around, or depending on the subject matter of the book?
I just, you know, I think in the beginning, because I began writing about LA and New York, that was a big thing. But, you know, now, you know, I have, you know, two characters that are in New York, one that, you know, that's two that are in LA. And, you know, and I'm wherever I am, I'm just writing it. Because when I'm writing, I'm not, you know, I'm not in the world. I'm in the book.
At dinner, you're born in L.A. At dinner, you said, "I had to get away from L.A. to write about it." How come?
You know, it's so wild. You know, because I was kind of I had to get away to L.A. From L.A. to become me. You know, like I said, also, I'm an only child. My mother's an only child. My father was an orphan. It was too close. I had to get away. And when I got away, I became a writer. You know, and I mean, that's what it is. I didn't plan to get away to be a writer, but once I got away, it came out. It's, oh, now you can do this, you know.
Laurie? When you...
I don't write about LA.
but what are the...
That's a simple
That's an easy
solution.
answer.
Yeah.
Do you always set your books in England, or?
No, I sent a lot of them in north part of California where I live. I have one cop series set in San Francisco, and I've started another one set in San Francisco. And yeah, so I write, which one of the problems of writing a series that moves around the world a lot is during COVID, you can't. So I was sort of limited as to what kind of research I could do. So that's when I wrote another series set in San Francisco.
Yes, right there. Louder.
It's not around anymore, and they worked, I think, 5 years coming up with that acronym. But yeah, that used to be a real unit till the Rampart scandal kind of.
That was the 80s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go like crazy.
I don't know. Les should answer that. He's the attorney.
Yes, all the way in the back. How does the feedback that you get change what you write?
Early feedback from family and friends, I think is part of that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that all of us, value that first person who isn't family, who's read the book and gives you some feedback, because before that it's, oh, you've written a book? Oh, sweet. And then you ask them, okay, did the plot work? What do you think of the character development? Oh, it's just nice. I liked it.
But you have much better people talking to you. When I started writing, and I was talking to my father, and I said, Dad, I'm writing these stories, and I gave him one, and he said, Walter, this is not a story. This is nothing. I mean, he says, listen, you're never going to make money as a writer. The prison system, that's what you should get into. That's a growing system.
They're closely related.
Yeah.
Benjamin Disraeli said that a biography should be written by an enemy. I don't think it was a cynical remark. I think what he meant was, if an enemy gives you credit for something, you probably earned it.
Yeah.
And I think the kind of criticism that is valuable, and I can only speak for myself, is people who are gonna, if there's something to tear apart, they'll find it and they'll say it. It used to be called constructive criticism. It's not where you're just giving blind approbation, but somebody who will intelligently and disinterestedly, interesting word, disinterestedly read and say what comes to mind or what doesn't, that in a way that's useful. And if they can find weaknesses, it's good to hear about them. I always also look for patterns in criticism. If 10 people tell you you're drunk, maybe it's time to think about lying down or something. And remember, a lot of your critics are not professional critics. They're like moviegoers, and everybody has an opinion and is entitled. But they may dance around a similar idea in a semi-articulate way that all boils down to, gee, I didn't understand the girl doing what she did or why she did it or something. And if 8 out of 10 people are sort of dancing around that thing. Maybe you want to revisit that and see if it can be made better.
I mean, you curate who your readers are, your early readers are, and you get people that are not going to blow smoke, people that will not pull punches and tell you what didn't work or what worked. I have a lot of cops and lawyers read my books because I've done neither of those jobs, and I want them, and I hope one of the things that the hallmark of my works are some kind of accuracy in these professions, and so you get that. I mean, I think I go back to your first question. I write mysteries because my mother read them voraciously and would hand them off to me. So while she was alive, she would read. She was my very first reader because she had read everything in the genre. And and I had, your mother's always going to say you're handsome and you're sweet and all the great stuff. But I had that discussion. Don't hold anything back. And I remember my first manuscript, she sent it back to me, and on some of the columns outside, she would write notes, but she kept writing NSG here and there. I said, "What's NSG?" And she goes, "Not so good." And then the other thing was she always, like a good mother, she always tracked when Harry Bosch was eating, and he wasn't eating, so she would say, the top corner, "Harry hasn't had anything to eat yet." And then like 60 pages later, it's like, "Not even a hot dog?" So you curate people that whatever they say is going to be legit and valuable, and it's very helpful.
This gentleman here.
Yes, I had a question about the sense of mystery. I mean, common to mysteries as the idea of an investigation for truth, or that everyone counts, or in some ways a character impressed into finding the truth, in order to not get beat up by the white cops. But I also come to it from the idea of divine revelation, and I think I can speak more to the gentleman's books, how the idea of death resonates within your characters. Easy in his community. I was just curious about you as writers, the three of you, maybe more so you, Michael. How has writing about death over this length of time changed or affected you personally as writers?
Is that a trick question?
I think we get confused with what our characters do. I mean, I have a really nice office with a view of the hills and stuff, and I write about murder investigation and people that go into darkness, but I'm not there myself, and I'm a former reporter, so I know how to get to people that do these real jobs, and I think there's something really sacred about the things I write about, and I try to capture that. But it's not something. There's not like a darkness growing in me or anything like that. I'm really detached from it. But when you read the books, I can see where you might think an author is like knee deep in this stuff, and but that's not really been my experience.
I think that, those of us who write more in the middle, you've got this spectrum in the mystery world, from the cozy, the traditional mystery, where death is only the machinery that gets it going. And at the other end of it is the thriller that is all suspense, it's all emotion, it's all, will they get there in time? And I occupy this sort of middle ground, so that death is real, death is painful, death is awful, but there's other things going on in the story. And I think that as a writer, I find myself somewhat offended at the kinds of fiction that treat death as just part of the tool that get the story going. I don't like that, because I find that if you're going to be honest with your characters, you have to have a life that is cut short have an impact on them. And it's not to do that is to some extent betraying what we do. I mean, we're mystery writers, we love the genre, but we have responsibilities to it as well.
You know, the death is really problematic for the people who survive. People who have lost loved ones, who've been involved in death or causing a death, maybe. I think, though, of one of the writers who I kind of loved just before I started writing was Andrew Vax. You know, and Andrew Vax talks about the suffering of children, which for me is so much worse, because these children are living through this horrendous experience of life. And I mean, his whole life was committed to that. He was a lawyer. He worked only for children. He would fight for anything. Who knows what Andrew did? I mean, he's crazy. But I think that you know, but that's the kind of thing that maybe I hear you talking about. It's that what we're struggling against, you know, which might be death and might be something else.
Yes, right there. How do you manage the physical toll of writing?
Sitting and writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, drink, yeah. Sorry, was I speaking for anybody else?
I get up every half an hour or so, walk around. That helps me a great deal. You know, the sitting in an office is much worse. You know, because you really kind of have to stay there. You know, but you know, so I know after a while you can like throw your back out and do all that kind of stuff. You know, and it's an important thing. You know?
I find that certain kinds of completely mindless physical movement really help with plot problems. So if I have a plot problem, I will often go and do a swim. And I have this pool that has a jet that you swim against, so you don't even have to turn. You just swim, and it's completely mindless. And often, and I always take a pencil with me, pencil and a piece of paper, because I'll work out the plot.
In the water? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I keep the paper off the side of the pool. Although someone has given me a pad. There's pads of waterproof paper that you can use if you're really tech. But you know, something that involves the body as well as the mind is good.
I think, well, we've all kind of admitted here that we don't do like 8 hours sitting in a chair. I think we concentrate and get the most done in me a morning, you in the morning. You said the same thing, I think. Yeah. So yeah, I think that it can be, you know, you can get carpal tunnel and all kinds of stuff if you, you know, do it too long. And, you know, sometimes you have so much momentum and you know what you're going to be writing for the next 20 hours or whatever, but you can't just do it for 20 hours. You gotta think about, you know, step back, think about it, be excited about getting back to it the next morning.
Go for walks. This gentleman.
I'd start every morning by rewriting what I wrote the day before.
Yep.
You know, I print it out. It's usually like whatever, 6 or 8 pages. Print it out, mark it up with a red pencil, then do those corrections, and it kind of jump starts the day, gets you going.
Do you have a word count?
No, I don't. No.
Taking walks is good. I walked. No one asked me, but I just realized.
Going to have to repeat that.
The question is, as mystery stories have evolved to become more realistic and procedurals becoming more accurate in reflecting what really goes on with police investigations, does that affect your thinking in terms of the real world? Do mysteries now start addressing social issues like gays, or what was the other one? Wrongful convictions.
But also, does the writer approach the thing thinking, I'm going to write about that?
Yeah.
Well, my books are set in the year I write them, and so maybe that's because I was a former journalist, so I'm always taking stuff in, and therefore it would be impossible for me not to think a little bit in that direction. Like, for example, I wrote a book that takes place on January 6th in LA, but the characters are all aware of what's going on in Washington, D.C., so I just wanted to do that. I remember a long time ago after 9/11 and they approved the Patriot Act, I said, I'm going to write a book where the dark side of the Patriot Act, bites Harry Bosch on the ass or something like that. So, because I'm writing very contemporary stories, I think it's a cheat if you don't include what's happening in culture, politics, or whatever. And what's happening in Los Angeles.
I write the series that's historical, and one of the things I really like about it, as well as moving around the world, is that each place they go, there are issues that are distinct for that area, so that they go to Palestine in 1919 and see the British and what they're doing there. But the reason that I write historicals is that it enables me to really zero in on something that is now. So the historical series acts like a mirror, and it tells me, what it is. Why was this revolution going on here, and what decisions were made in 1919 in Palestine that we're living with now, and what is it that that we're seeing in northern India that they're seeing in 1924 that we are now living with. And that, I don't know if that counts as much as social issues as politics, or the fact that we read stuff because it shows us something about the world.
Yes. How do you handle bumping off a main character? How do you handle bumping off a main character?
Retirement? Well, Conan Doyle didn't manage to do it.
Who managed to do it?
Conan Doyle did.
Conan Doyle.
No, he didn't.
That's what I said. I mean, he didn't manage to do it.
Couldn't do it.
I've never done it. I like my characters. I don't want to kill them. So I haven't done it. I guess it'd be hard to do. See, killing easy. That'd be like, yeah.
I've never bumped off a main character, but I've never bumped off a main character, but I've bumped off important characters, and you just don't do it like out of the blue. There's usually some concern or a reason behind it. I bumped off Harry Bosch's ex-wife because I wanted, to keep the series changing, and that was a device I did so that he would raise his daughter, and I just thought that would keep the series going, so she had to go.
Nicholas Freeling wrote a book. He had Van der Valk was his character, and he writes this book, and halfway through, a bomb goes off in a park, and then the next chapter starts after the funeral, and you think, you keep waiting, and chapter after chapter, you keep waiting for this plot, and that's the end of his main character, and his wife takes over the series. Auprès de ma blonde.
This gentleman, yes.
Michael.
Yeah, of course. It's like no, it's like Easy Rollins. It's like you live with these people for decades. They mean something to you. You know, Harry is aged in real time, and he's getting up there. But, you know, I always say I hope the last book that I'm writing is a Harry Bosch book. So, and that he's alive on the last page.
On this note, and on the theory in show business, which is where I come from, that you always want to leave your audience wanting more, I bid you all a very nice good night. Thank you, and thanks to our